Okay, so diving into the open source world today, and one thing that's been causing a bit of a stir lately is this whole discussion about bringing Rust into the Linux kernel.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic, People have pretty strong opinions about it.
Absolutely. And, our listeners, they're here to get to the heart of the matter, no fluff. So we're going to break down why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into some really fundamental questions, right? About operating system architecture, even the long-term future of Linux itself. And, it's StoneFly. That's something we think about a lot.
Right, because we rely on that stability and security. That's kind of our bread and butter, right? Providing those robust data solutions. And StoneFly is all about providing that rock solid foundation, which brings us to, well, our awesome data protection appliance.
Oh, yeah, tell them about that.
So right now we have a screaming deal on our 70 TB unit, and get this, you can expand it all the way up to 4 petabytes.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is, and it comes with all the bells and whistles, air-gapped and immutable backups, all the good stuff. We've got Veeam, Rubrik, Commvault, even site recovery built right in. And of course, we didn't skimp on security. It's got object lockdown technology, so ransomware doesn't stand a chance.
Sounds like a pretty comprehensive solution.
It really is. And for a limited time, it's going for just $7,995. So if you're serious about protecting your data, you need to check this out. Just head over to stonefly.com or shoot an email to sales@stonefly.com.
So yeah, like you were saying, a stable, secure operating system is essential for everything we do, especially when it comes to data integrity and availability.
Couldn't agree more. Now, back to this Rust debate. It seems like things really kicked off when a maintainer of the Rust for Linux project stepped down.
Right. And the reason they gave was non-technical nonsense,
Hmm.
which is intriguing, to say the least. And this all happened around the same time as some pretty public disagreements between the Ahahi team working on the Apple Silicon graphics drivers and, well, the developers over at the DRM subsystem, the folks who handle graphics in the kernel. So definitely some tension brewing right from the start.
So not exactly a smooth start for bringing these different development groups together with this new language. Did Linus weigh in on this?
He did, actually.
Ah,
And you might be surprised by his take on it.
how so? You'd think he'd be trying to, smooth things over.
Well, he actually said, and I'm quoting him here, that he actually enjoys these arguments.
Really?
Yeah, he sees them as a sign that people are passionate about the kernel.
Mhm.
They really care about what happens to it.
That's a pretty optimistic way to look at it. I mean, obviously, he doesn't condone developers leaving a project because things get too heated, but it does show just how deeply people feel about the Linux kernel. It's almost like it becomes part of their identity.
Absolutely. He even made a comparison to the eternal Vi versus Emacs debate, like that kind of passionate, almost religious attachment to your tools.
It's funny how those things can become so, well, personal, isn't it? So when we talk about these disagreements, what's really at the heart of it? What are the Rust advocates pushing for that's rubbing some of those longtime C developers the wrong way?
It really boils down to this fundamental difference in philosophy. You see, Rust is all about memory safety, like it's built into the language. You have to follow certain rules, certain architectural patterns to make sure your code is memory safe.
Okay, so that's the Rust side of things. And on the C side.
Well, a lot of the developers who have been working on the kernel for, decades with C, they believe that a skilled C programmer can write perfectly safe code without needing those kinds of, well, restrictions. They take pride in their ability to manage memory carefully and efficiently. They see these kinds of errors as something that simply should never happen if you're doing things right.
So you have this clash between a language that tries to prevent memory errors by design and this group of very experienced developers who have let's say, a more traditional approach to memory management.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, Linus himself, he's spoken about how he really likes the simplicity and elegance of C. He gets why people love it.
Sure, C is powerful, but it also comes with its own set of challenges, right?
Definitely. And Linus acknowledges that. He said that the very simplicity of C, the fact that it gives you so much control, also means it's easier to make mistakes, especially when it comes to memory. And that's where Rust comes in. With features like the borrow checker and its whole system of lifetimes, Rust tries to catch those kinds of memory-related errors before they can even become bugs.
So it's almost like trying to prevent the problem before it even exists, rather than relying on the developer's experience and carefulness to avoid those pitfalls.
Right. And this shift in how you approach programming, well, it's not an easy one to make, especially for developers who've spent their entire careers working in C. it's understandable that some of them might be resistant to this new way of thinking. And this actually ties in nicely with something else Linus said about how the Linux kernel has become so vast and complex that absolutely nobody understands everything.
So nobody has the full picture.
Exactly.
Mm.
He said that not everyone who's good at C is going to be good at Rust, and vice versa. And he sees this as a potential strength. Like you could have teams specializing in different parts of the kernel, using the language that's best suited for their particular area. Maybe one team is really good at writing drivers in C because they understand the hardware so well.
And another team could be building new modules in Rust, taking advantage of its memory safety features.
Precisely. And that kind of specialization, where different parts of a system leverage different strengths, well, that's something we understand really well at StoneFly when we're architecting complex data solutions.
It's about playing to everyone's strengths, right? But I can also see how that might lead to some, well, turf wars. See developers feeling like Rust is encroaching on their domain within the kernel.
And Linus acknowledges that those concerns are there, but when he was asked if he thought the whole Rust integration was a failure, he was pretty clear that it's way too early to say. I mean, they've only been working on this for a couple of years.
So it's still very much a work in progress.
Exactly. And he has a very pragmatic long-term view of it.
Hmm.
He said that even if the integration doesn't go exactly as planned, which, by the way, he doesn't think will happen, even if that were the case, they'll still have learned a lot from the experience.
It's all about the long game. That reminds me of how we approach things at StoneFly. It's about constantly evaluating new technologies, finding ways to balance innovation with the stability and reliability that our customers depend on. Just like with our data protection appliances, we're always looking for ways to improve, to stay ahead of the curve. And sometimes that means trying new things, even if they don't work out exactly as planned. The important thing is to learn and adapt.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And speaking of challenges, you mentioned infrastructure earlier. Why exactly is integrating Rust into the Linux kernel such a hurdle from an infrastructure standpoint?
Well, think about it. The kernel's been built and refined over decades using C. And over time, a lot of infrastructure has been put in place to help ensure memory safety. Things like static analysis tools, these programs that scan your code for potential problems.
Right, and of course the heavy use of debug builds. Those are versions of the kernel specifically designed to catch errors, even if it means running a bit slower. It's all about finding those bugs early on.
Exactly. And Linus pointed out that the changes needed to integrate Rust, they're not small incremental tweaks. He described them as much bigger and much more in your face.
So it's not just about swapping out one language for another.
Nope. Integrating Rust with its memory safety guarantees means potentially rethinking some pretty fundamental assumptions in those core parts of the kernel. And that's led to pushback from some of the developers who are responsible for those core parts, like the DRM KMS team, the folks who handle graphics. They're understandably cautious about making big changes to a system that's working reliably.
It's like trying to swap out a critical component in a complex machine while it's still running.
Right.
It takes a lot of careful planning and expertise to avoid causing disruptions. And that's something we take very seriously at StoneFly, especially when we're dealing with our customers' data. Their systems need to stay up and running no matter what. We can't afford to take risks with their critical data, which is why we design our solutions with that kind of stability in mind.
Absolutely. And these challenges have led some people to propose a pretty radical idea, building entirely new operating systems from the ground up, using Rust. Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
Linus thinks it's probably happening independently of what's going on with the Linux kernel. He made an interesting point about how, when it comes to building operating systems, you don't really have a lot of choices in terms of programming languages. You need a language that gives you that low-level control, and that basically means C, C-like languages, or Rust.
So even if Rust doesn't become a major part of the Linux kernel, it's still likely to play a big role in the future of operating systems.
Right. And Linus acknowledged that while Linux is incredibly widely used, I mean, it's everywhere, from servers to embedded systems, even in those 5G modem chips, he also knows that it might not be the perfect fit for every single use case.
So there's room for other players.
Exactly. There's always going to be a need for smaller, more specialized operating systems. And Rust, along with C and other languages, will definitely be explored for those purposes.
It sounds like he's not ruling out the possibility that, some years down the line, we might see some new operating systems built with Rust, maybe even challenging Linux in certain areas.
He did say that nothing lasts forever, which is true, right? No matter how dominant a technology seems today, things can always change. And that kind of long-term thinking, well, it's something we really value at StoneFly too. We're always looking ahead, making sure our data protection solutions are built to last, to adapt to whatever the future brings.
Speaking of looking ahead, let's not forget about that special offer we have on our data protection appliance. That 70 TB unit, expandable up to 4 petabytes, with all those great features, air-gapped and immutable backup, Veeam, Rubrik, Commvault, even site recovery, and of course that rock-solid ransomware protection with object lockdown technology, all for just $7,995. It's a deal you don't want to miss.
Definitely a great opportunity for anyone looking to up their data protection game. And, when you think about it, this whole discussion about Rust and Linux, it really highlights the constant tension between the stability and familiarity of tried and true technologies like C and the potential benefits of embracing newer, more secure approaches like what Rust offers. It's a balancing act, and one that we constantly have to consider at StoneFly.
So it's not just a technical question, it's a philosophical one.
Absolutely. It's about how we build critical software, about how we manage complexity, about how we make sure those systems are secure and reliable for the long haul. And for companies like StoneFly, whose data protection solutions rely on that bedrock of a stable and secure operating system, these discussions are, well, they're pretty important.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to that commitment to security. It's not just an afterthought. It's something that needs to be baked into the very foundation of our systems. And that's something we take very seriously at StoneFly.
Right. Whether it's through features like object lockdown technology in our appliances, or by closely following developments in operating system security, like this whole Rust debate, we're always looking for ways to strengthen that foundation.
So let's wrap things up here. We've had a really interesting deep dive into this whole Rust and Linux situation. It's clearly a complex and evolving story. But what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I think the big one is that this isn't just about adding some new code to the kernel. It's about fundamentally different approaches to software development. It's about the dynamics of a large and passionate community, and it's about the long-term evolution of a critical piece of infrastructure.
And while there are definitely challenges with integrating Rust into the existing infrastructure, Linus Torvalds seems to have a very optimistic long-term view.
Right. He sees it as a valuable learning experience, regardless of the ultimate outcome. And he emphasizes the importance of experimentation in a project as complex and vital as the Linux kernel.
So, final thought for our listeners. As we become increasingly reliant on technology, and as the threats to that technology continue to evolve, how might this focus on memory safety, embodied in languages like Rust, shape the future of operating system development? Will Linux adapt and evolve, or will we see entirely new operating systems emerge to meet these challenges?
It's a question worth pondering. The need for secure foundations in our digital world is only going to become more pressing. And the discussions happening within the kernel community, they offer a glimpse into how the industry is grappling with these challenges, looking for ways to build a more secure future for everyone. And at StoneFly, we're committed to being a part of that effort, providing robust and reliable data protection solutions that help our customers navigate this ever-changing landscape. So be sure to check out our website, stonefly.com, or contact our sales team at sales@stonefly.com to learn more about how we can help you safeguard your critical data.
This has been a fascinating exploration. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.